You're such an asshole.
Interesting question. He wants to be kept anonymous, so we will. I keep hearing about how the United States uses the petrodollar as a tool to weaken countries as a way to make military invasions easier. What is it and how does it work? So, all right, this will be a long one or a complex one. Even I had to brush up a little bit. To understand this, we have to understand what a petrodollar is, and I'll tell you why you're wrong. To answer your question, we don't need anything to make invasions easier. We're just the biggest fucking military, and we'll just do whatever we want. That's it. Whether we have petrodollars or not, we have the world's largest military budget. That's what makes invasion easier. Whether it's backed up by a petrodollar, petrochemical, or not, doesn't matter. But let's go way back, even before Cappy was born. You had several wars, several conflicts between the Israelis and Egypt, Syria. Jordan was in and not in, whatever. There was the conflicts in the Middle East, 6 Days War, Yom Kippur War, and I think 2 other wars. They get jarbled up in my mind. And OPEC was formed and say, we're sick of this stuff. We're sick of the Western-backed Israelis. We're going to stick it to these guys. We're going to do an oil embargo. So that jacked up oil prices, fuel prices. It hurt the U.S. economy, among global economy. Caused, well, they say that they make it simple in your economics class that, and then stagflation happened in the 70s because of the oil embargo. It's like, yeah, maybe the lazy baby boomers entering the labor market with no talents and a lazy fuck-off attitude might have caused that. But that's a different argument. Regardless, there was inflation and slowing economic growth, and we kind of wanted to stop that. So maybe not at that then time, President Nixon, I'm sure it was his economic advisors, and Henry Kissinger came up with a plan. They said, we're going to approach the Saudis and other Middle Eastern countries, and we're going to give them a deal. We're going to say, look, if you promise to sell your oil in U.S. dollars, and only U.S. dollars, meaning you only take U.S. dollars, for payment for your oil, we will sell you some advanced weaponry, which they really wanted. And here's the other thing, you have to buy U.S. treasuries. In other words, you have to lend back that money by buying U.S. treasuries, and we'll pay you back with interest and all that and down the road. And I forgot to look it up, but the Saudis now own trillions of dollars worth of the U.S. National debt, but that's another time. I personally don't know why the Saudis took that deal. Seems stupid to me, like, wait, we're going to promise to sell it in dollars. So we get these dollars and we have to buy U.S. Treasury? We have to lend you back that money? Doesn't sound good to me. But they did. Basically, the U.S. says, look, we'll be your you don't need a military, we'll cover it. And they say, okay, fine. And here's some nice weapons, by the way, too. In addition to that, the dollar had recently been taken off the gold standard. This was in 1971. Previous to 1971, the dollar was backed by precious metals. You could, I don't know if you remember silver certificates, they were definitely, 1971 is when they stopped. You could take your Federal Reserve notes and go to the Federal Reserve Bank, and you could exchange your dollar for a fixed amount of gold or silver at the time. Silver certificates, you take so you would get silver back. So the US dollar, yes, it was a piece of paper currency, but it was backed by actual precious metals that had intrinsic value. So they took everything off that standard. Inflation occurred because of not only the oil embargoes, but other reasons. Printing money has a tendency to do that. But there was absolutely nothing really backing up the dollar. It was simply the faith and credit of the United States federal government. I would argue that it was the economic productive capacity of the United States that gives its currency value. And I'd argue that's any modern day economy right now. You have to have faith that the dollar has to be accepted. But going back to a simpler economic concept, you'd be like, yeah, this is a piece of paper. I can't even trade this in for gold, but yeah, you can trade it in for economic production. You get a Big Mac, you get this, you can get a whole bunch of other stuff. But that's kind of splitting hairs on what gives a currency value. The whole point is that even you could say with the psychology, like, oh, the dollar's off the gold standard, what gives it value? So there was legitimate concern, or at least a gnawing at the back of people's heads, what gives the dollar value? Then you have the oil embargo. It causes inflation. Now we really got to worry about the dollar value. And so to kind of kill these two birds with one stone, to give the dollar some kind of intrinsic backed up value and to hedge it against price fluctuations in oil. We came up with that deal with the Saudis and other Middle Eastern countries that if you sell your oil in US dollars, we'll do all these other things for you. Right? Now what that did was two things. It gave the return some kind of intrinsic value. Now the dollar was somewhat backed up by oil. It was connected to, once again, the commodity that had intrinsic value, oil. Some people would say oil is more value than gold or silver because you can actually use oil for things. Gold and silver back then was predominantly jewelry and fillings. Now there's more industrial uses for gold and silver. But back then it really was more ornamental, it was not functional. So you could even argue that the dollar was backed up, or at least tied to, something that had a lot of economic value, perhaps the most valuable commodity in the world. And then also, not only did it provide that intrinsic value where we went off the gold standard in 1971, it provided us this hedge against any other oil spikes in the Mideast, and kind of like, hey, we're in this together now, don't ever pull off that shit again. It also gave the US dollar a lot more value than other competing or global currencies because everybody needs oil. Saudi Arabia was the largest producer of it. And so what this created was this, I would say, artificial demand. It could be even argued temporary, although this agreement has been kept for, gosh, almost 50 years now. It created this artificial demand for U.S. dollars in the globe on the international marketplace. Beforehand, if you wanted dollars, it was because you were going to go buy something in the U.S. Now, what? I got to go buy oil? And you go up to, let's say you're China, you got the Chinese yuan, and you're like, hey, here's my yuan, and the Saudis are like, oh no, we only take dollars now. The Chinese like, what? We've always, what are you doing? Oh, we got this agreement with the Americans, you have to buy it in dollars. And the Chinese like, oh, fuck. Now we got to go to the currency market. So what they had to do? They had to trade yuan in for dollars, and then go back to the Saudis. So this created a significant increase in global demand for the US dollar and made the dollar stronger. All right? Now, you could, to get to your question, I keep hearing about how the United States uses the petrodollar as a tool to weaken countries as a way to make military invasions easier. The only way that question or your theory or your speculation holds is in, okay, well, the US dollar is stronger than what it would have been had we not had this petrodollar arrangement with the Saudis. So that gives us larger purchasing power to buy foreign-made stuff that we use in our military. Like, I think our uniforms are made in China. Okay, so it gives us a little bit of purchasing power advantage. I would say that's not more than 1 or 2% of an advantage when it comes to the United States military, and we spend $600 billion a year on our military. So there is no connection between the petrodollar and making it easier for us to invade countries. We didn't create this arrangement with the Saudis so we could invade countries. I don't know if you know, as the United States, you piss us off enough, we'll just invade your fucking country. Whether we have a strong dollar or not, it's because we have a huge military budget, and we got a huge military. So that's what it was. It was a way to hedge against inflation, hedge against price shocks that would come from the oil market, and also a way to reintroduce some kind of intrinsic value to the US dollar. Now, going back to what I speculated on before as to what really gives a currency its value, that may have been the case. You could make the argument that the petrodollar was more relevant in the 60s and 70s when we had these gas guzzlers and we were very energy dependent, oil dependent on oil imports. But a couple things have changed, actually a lot of things have changed since then, that I think the petrodollar is less relevant, perhaps even moot by this point. A couple of them are this. One, we've produced our own oil here in the United States through fracking. There's other ways we've discovered, but it's no longer just centrally located in the Middle East. I think Venezuela today has the largest proven reserve. Too bad they got communism. They can't, get toilet paper, let alone a drill and a refinery process. Who knew that was part of capitalism? But there are other sources of oil, particularly, especially in the United States and Canada, where they produced so much oil back in 2014, 2015 that we crashed the price of oil that it actually put all those people out of business. And then what was it? I think the United States, we actually became an exporter of oil for a couple of years there. So this has put a cap on the amount of inflation or general economic damage that can happen with increases in the price of oil, because if it gets too high, you can see a map. It's a really cool map. It shows you at what price per barrel of oil different wells in the United States start to become profitable. And all they've done is cap them off, and they can throw the switch back on and start pumping oil again if it's profitable again. So this is going to keep a limit on the price of oil going forward. So oil no longer plays that vital of international relationship between the Saudi economy and the U.S. economy, or any of the oil-producing economies of the U.S., because now we have our own supply of oil. Another thing, we've become way more economically efficient in terms of our oil consumption. We consume more oil, but we have way more efficient cars. I mean, even some of the state governments they've had to increase some of them are introducing mileage taxes because they're communist socialist fucks, and they just got to make it annoying as hell. The smarter ones just jacked up their gas tax because people were getting so many more miles per gallon, but driving the same amount of distance on the roads, that the roads were getting the same amount of wear and tear, but with declining revenues in gas tax income. So they had to jack up the gas taxes because they weren't covering enough to repair and maintain the roads. So we're becoming much more fuel efficient, not just with our vehicles and everything else. We've switched to solar and wind and really not nuclear, but and we got for a while some of our electricity was being generated with oil and coal. Now we're switching away from that. So we're just consuming less per GDP unit produced in oil. That's also happening globally a little bit, even offsetting China, but as it pertains to the U.S. dollar, there's that there. I would also say that the U.S. dollar, I really wonder if you need something that's of intrinsic value. As long as you have a functional currency, a functional fiat currency that is not backed by a commodity or anything else, or perhaps tangentially backed up by a commodity, it gives you enough faith to have faith in it. We can't always trade that in for oil, or we can trade that in for some token amount of silver. What I really think gives the U.S. dollar, or any currency, the value is the economic production of the United States. You take, and here's what shows you how strong the dollar. Well, let's take this aside. Let's not do the dollar. Let's say you take Mexican pesos. So you are in Mexico. You have Mexican pesos, and you want to go buy a taco. You can go to the local taco place. You give them the pesos, you get your taco. If you take that peso, pretty much anywhere else in the world, they say, "Hey, I'd like to buy some, hamburgers in the United States." People are gonna look at you, get that fucking funny money out of here. We're not gonna take that, right? Because they're not they take. In the U.S., they take dollars. In Japan, you went to Japan with your pesos, they'd be like, "What the hell is this? No, you can't have any sushi. Get the fuck out of here." Well, they'd be more polite than that because they're Japanese. So, the only place you could spend that money is in Mexico. So, the only thing that's going to give it value is the entire economic productive capacity of Mexico. So you have your total money supply, and that's what you're going to use to consume all the goods and services produced in Mexico in a year, and not to mention buying all the assets that you may buy in and out of, or invest in, or sell, or whatever. So the Mexican peso is directly tied to, and I would argue it's value driven by, the economic production of Mexico within that border. You could say about the same thing about the yen, the Argentinian bolivar, I think it is, or any other currency out there. The U.S. dollar is a little bit different because it's so strong and so widely accepted and stable. You look at a lot of other countries where they just jack up their inflation. We'll just print off more money because that always works, and we don't understand no economics. So, you could walk into Uganda right now with actual U.S. dollars. You could walk in there with cigarettes, and you'll hail a cab faster than you will with whatever their shillings are. For a while, when Russia was in economic turmoil after the Soviet Union had collapsed and they were restructuring their economy, dollars would get you a cab. Cigarettes would get you a cab before rubles would, because it wasn't that stable of a currency. That happens sometimes when there's like an obvious dominant economic superpower, like in Rome's time, their lira, was that what it was called? People would take Roman currency back in the day because you knew it had the full force of the Roman Empire behind it, and if you didn't, they might kill you or enslave you, whichever. So the U.S. economy has diversified a lot. That what gives it the currency its value is not this single commodity type of economy like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has oil, and that's about it. That's really about it. Dubai, if you're looking at an interesting case in economics, is I think it was the Prince of Dubai or whatever. Was it Abu Dhabi? I forgot. He was like, we got to diversify, and he did. And there's tourism, and there's golf, and there's a lot of fun other different stuff going on in Dubai, because he diversified out of just we're not just going to be oil. Hong Kong's another example where they diversified into a financial center. Singapore, a small little town. I mean, it's a big town, but a small little area. They've diversified out of, well, they never were in oil, but a lot of the oil-producing countries have not diversified out of oil. They're still the same old game plan. The United States has diversified into much more in-demand and cutting edge. I mean, we're on the cutting edge of pretty much everything, but internet technologies, cell phones, all that other stuff. That makes our economy more resilient, more stable, and more sustainable against economic shocks. So it's like, okay, this part of the economy, I remember it was, the Bakken oil field was a perfect example where, we had a horrible economic recession with housing, but then the oil prices went up, and all of a sudden we had this booming industry again, and we're diversified. We're not contingent on one thing. So that will make for a stronger dollar, as opposed to, I'm trying to think of a country that's solely reliant on tourism or another single economic, like that's all, they're a one-trick pony. There's oil countries. Oh, what's another one? Trying to think of what there's not a lot now that I'm thinking about it. Norway, all they got is fish. I'm kidding. They got other stuff. They got snow. No, you get the point though. The U.S. dollar, because of its diversified economy, and we're producing so much in a variety of stuff, it calls for a more stable and therefore more sought after currency. So again, I don't think the petrochemical or the petrodollar or the price of oil really is that relevant or germane anymore. We're deriving more value from the fact we're a global dominant economic superpower, and we're not just a one-trick pony. We produce a lot of things. What was the other thing? There was the fact we produce our own oil. We're a diversified economy. Oh God, there was another thing where I really don't believe the value that oil provides backing up the U.S. dollar is germane. I think it really is. Oh, that was the other thing. Thank you. I think what's really giving the dollar its value, aside from the U.S. military, where we can go and smite thee at any time we want, is the fact that we are the least corrupt, largest economy in the world. Not only for oil purchases, but there are other reasons you'd want to have a strong, stable currency when you have other countries dealing with international trade with one another. Let's say you take two highly corrupt economies, two corrupt countries. Let's say it's China and Venezuela. All right, these are horrifically corrupt countries. Nobody trusts the value of the Venezuelan bolivar, I think is a currency. People really don't trust China, may trust them a little bit more. But let's say the Venezuelans or the Chinese want to sell tractor farming for, well, Venezuela's got nothing. They're young women. That's all they got. Oh, so sad. All these horrible stories about these poor gals. They got to go to Colombia to be prostitutes, and they ship the money back home. Let's say back in the day when Venezuela had oil. Oh, they have oil. They just don't have the workers to do anything about it. China would sell tractors to Venezuela. Venezuela would sell oil to China. And they say, well, how are we going to, what dollar are we going to denominate? And the Chinese would say, yuan, our currency. Venezuela says, no, bolivar. The hell you. We tried that communism thing a while ago, and we lost 50 million people. Bullshit. Well, let's agree on a currency we all can get along with, and that would be the U.S. dollar. Back in the day, it was sterling, the British pound, sterling silver. But now there is additional international demand beyond having accounts settled for purchasing oil in dollars, there are other demands, international demands for U.S. currency that really has nothing to do with buying buying stuff in the United States. It's for establishing contracts in U.S. dollars. So there's a demand there. I think my all-time favorite example of showing the strength of the U.S. economy is where the financial crisis, the global financial crisis, hit because of the housing crisis in the United States. Who started the housing crash in the United States? It was the United States. Where did everybody rush to park their money for safekeeping in the world? They ran to the United States dollar. We're the one that caused the crash, but we're still the most stable, most productive economy, large economy in the world, that people are still going to come to us. I mean, you could go and, Switzerland, by far, much more stable, much more moral and honorable country. But they can't handle trillions of dollars being bought of Swiss francs. It would drive up, how does that work? It would drive up, they couldn't export anymore. Their goods become way too expensive. People couldn't afford them anymore. So it's kind of bad. I would say they should go on a purchasing spree, but they didn't. You could go to Norway and say, well, we'd like Norwegian kroners. It's like, well, yeah, but there's not enough kroners to meet that much demand, and then you're going to drive up the kroners, their value, and then Norwegians say, well, no one's going to buy our oil, no one's going to buy our fish or our caribou and our snow. Fish, caribou, oil, and snow. That's what the Norwegians got. So since the U.S. is basically 30% of the global economy, and we're nowhere near as corrupt as the next couple of economies in line, which would be China. Japan is also corrupt. I know everyone thinks, the Japanese, no, look at their corruption scores, the corruption perception index. Russia, Brazil, India, East India, they are all way more corrupt. So there is, I think, the faith of the globe that, personally, I think dwarfs any additional economic strength or purchasing power the dollar gets from being the currency that people purchase oil in from Saudi Arabia. I really think it's the fact that we have a large military, we have a large economy, and we're a stable, relatively stable Western country compared to any other competitors in the world, that people seek a stable Roman lira type currency. And in the past it was Britain, today it's the United States, and the future will be something else. So I really don't see, with your thesis there, I keep hearing about how the United States uses the petrodollar as a tool to weaken countries as a way to make military invasions easier. We don't. We really don't use the petro. It has nothing to do with military invasion. If there is any kind of economic warfare that occurs, which it does, the United States will send in economic espionage agents, and they will inflate the currency. They'll fetter about, I think we did this in Iraq both times, as we sent out counterfeit Iraqi bills. We could do other stuff. I mean, it's like, maybe we couldn't send in Agent Jones to inflate Baghdad's economy. Or we could just strike their oil plant right there with one Tomahawk cruise missile. There is economic warfare that is waged. It can be effective, but it really is not. That's not why we have the petrodollar. That's not really it. What you're probably running into, and this is where they say, is you have some low IQ or easily dupable morons who be, it's war for oil, we're doing it for the oil, no blood for oil. And it's, I'll prove it wrong right now, that we don't go to war for oil. And the reason why, especially with Iraq, crunch the numbers, synthesized oil is much cheaper than war. We could go ahead and what have we spent? I'll have to look at the numbers again. Synthesized oil, ever so roughly, would take $1 trillion worth of retooling the U.S. economy. You would make it out of coal and trees. Was it lumber they'd make it out of? But you don't drill for oil, you just make it at home, synthesized. And the price per barrel of oil would be $100. Now they calculate how much did the U.S. consume over the course of the Iraq war. And I think we spent, to get the oil production of Iraq, you take the total war cost, it was something like $300 a barrel. It was many times more expensive to go to war and invade a country to get their oil. than it would be just to, not to mention, when you blow up a country with missiles that were created from home, there's no jobs in that. There's only destruction. And then we got to go back in and build up the pipe we just blew. Whereas if you really wanted an economics program, a Keynesian wet dream come true, you would build a synthetic oil industry here in the United States. Instead of spending trillions on the wars in the Middle East, you would spend $1 trillion here to hire a bunch of engineers and whatever, and plants and workers and every cascading effects of that to support that industry, to build a synthetic oil industry here in the United States, which roughly comes, they have estimates between like $90 and $110 per barrel of oil US. And it's much cheaper to do that. And this is not the first time that's happened. The Germans in World War II, because we kept bombing their oil plants and their oil supply lines, they had to go synthetic because that was the only way to do it. So it's not like people didn't know about that. I always found that funny. Like, it's for the oil, man. Oh, shut the fuck up, you moron. Probably the same type of thing. If we all boycott big oil and don't buy gas on this day, then they'll go bankrupt the next. So that's what it is. That's what the petrodollar is. That's how it works. That's why I don't think it's relevant anymore. I really don't. With all the other stuff going on. And it's not, oh, we use it to invade countries. Trust me, if we want to invade a country, we will. We're not going to look at the price of oil. All right, questions, answers, Asshole Consulting. Great question, by the way. I learned a little bit of something. Had to go and figure it out myself. AssholeConsulting.com. Check out the links below. Books, other things, and stuff. We'll see you guys later. Toodles.